When does this thing start?
2 minutes ago.
Oh, okay. So let's start, because I actually should have been here 2 minutes ago. Yeah, I guess everyone's read the cartoon by now. This is a talk that was written by Tim Bunce, revised a couple of years ago now. A bit of it's out of date. It talks about how modern Perl 5.10 is. But a lot of people who work with Perl get these myths. We get them all the time. Perl's complicated, it's confusing, it's whatever. And here's some answers you can give people. And it's a lot of it is just a way, there are people who will say, oh, I really think Perl's complicated, it's a pain in the ass to use, but I still like it. That's a bad way to think about it. So this gives us just a better vocabulary for describing what we use. So this is the baseless myths talk. I didn't write this, so I'm going to have to read the slides with everyone. But an important thing too, and this is one thing about Perl that Larry Wallace said a lot of times. It's not that he doesn't like other languages. The ideal of a good Perl programmer is someone who uses the other languages and understands how to pull useful idioms in from other languages. I mean, Perl's everything from Lisp on forward thrown into it because they work, not because Lisp is evil. But you have to go out and say, what is there about Lisp that's good? Python, pick a language. Even Java has parts that work. So anyway, one thing too, I guess I'm supposed to stand in the middle of this. The notion that Perl is confusing, complicated, hard, whatever. If you look at what it takes to get work done, you find that good developers have more effect than the language. If you put a group of good programmers in a room, you can hand them Perl, Python, Java, C, assembly, and the job will get done. So when you're thinking about this stuff, again, it's not about Perl is complicated. It's what's the right tool for a job. If Perl works, use it. This is not about me. This is the guy who wrote it. People here know who Tim Bunce is?
Amen.
Yeah, well, but how many people have used anything that Tim Bunce has written? Raise your hand.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what has anyone here never worked with a database? Have you never used Perl 5? Then you've used Tim Bunce's products. So this is his version of a camel. The first myths I'll deal with, and I got to go through these really fast, are about Perl 5. There's some about Perl 6 too that are later. But here are the myths. The first one is Perl is dead. Now, you think about it. Perl's 22, and this is really 25 years old now. Perl 5 has been around for long enough to vote. And it's an interesting thing Gabor pointed out in the testing class. A lot of people don't get involved in Perl because CPAN's got how many bazillion modules on it. If you're just getting into programming and you really want to go in and contribute to something and write the next new great module that does something, it's probably already on CPAN. So one of the things, if we want to attract people into the community, you've got to find interesting things for people to do. So there's a pretty gig. His way of looking at Perl. There's been a lot of thing about Perl buzz, the notion that Perl isn't in the news, it isn't mentioned, therefore it's dead, it's dying, whatever. But what's interesting is if you look at this and you think, what languages might these be through, I think this was the end of 2009. If you look at web developer, people really want people with PHP. But what do most people use Perl for? Do you know who some of the most heavy-duty users of Perl are on the planet? The financial firms. They just don't advertise a lot of Perl because they're very secretive about what they do. If you look for software engineers, guess what? Perl is one of the most heavily used languages. If you get out of just thinking of Perl as a web language, it's very much alive in bioinformatics, in finance, and a lot of other areas. If you look at, we can see through these. Why is Perl doing so well? Think about it. CPAN is one reason. Even if it's hard to find things sometimes, if you go to Perlmonks, if you go to other places, you can find what people know is on CPAN. If you look at the number of modules that people use heavily, these are things that are in active development. Having this many things being worked on, PIDL, PO, the rest of it, the new stuff with Plaque, doesn't sound like a dead language to me. It sounds like people are actively doing it. If you look at where CPAN is, we can skip through a couple of these. If you're using CPAN, if you push your work onto CPAN, you get a lot of things out of it. One thing is the smoke testing. How many people here have modules on CPAN? Well, you know, but one of the things you get if you subscribe to it are the smoke tests. So one thing that happens every single day is Perl on virtual machines compiled for threading, not threading, 386s, 46s, AMDs. I think there's even one running VMS out there somewhere. They will smoke test. They'll do a make, test, install on your module. And I get a list every day of a dozen things that hopefully passed. But these are platforms I have no access to. I'll never want to have access to 45 of these platforms. And you get them every day just by sticking things on CPAN. Again, that's a sign of something that's alive. There's active work going on. And the level of smoke testing that you get out of CPAN is, I think, ahead of any other language on the planet. Search.cpan.org, we've all used that. It's fun just to wander through it sometime. Type something you're working on and see how many modules have that name in it. And again, you'll find it's a very much alive thing because you'll find new things all the time. The upload rate to CPAN, again, this is a bit dated. The graph is even higher. Doesn't sound like a dead language to me. People are actively putting things into the community archive. The new distros, the number of contributors keeps going up. The code on CPAN, a lot of it is new. If you look at when are the most recent things, there's one of the things you can get on, there's a mailing list, or there's a list on pause of things that were pushed in today. And I stopped subscribing to it because there's too much stuff going in. I just don't have time to look at it. That doesn't sound like a dead language when people are putting that much new material onto the archive every single day. The Perl community, the Perl Mongers, we're here, YAPC. There's a lot going on in the Perl community, which again doesn't sound like a dead language. Perl gets used for a lot of things. Java gets pushed, partly because Sun sells it. But there were a number of people here at the meeting who work for an insurance company that's doing all their work in Perl. They're switching from COBOL to Perl. So there are projects that are adopting Perl today. There are a lot of startups that use Perl. So again, dead isn't a language that I'd use for this. So there's the people, it looks like, there's all the jokes about, there's no obfuscated Perl contest because you don't need to obfuscate it. But this is an interesting thing about Perl. There's more than one way to do it. There's a lot of phrases in Perl about this. But the point is, Perl makes the assumption that you're a programmer. If you're writing Perl, you're programming it. And therefore, it's up to you to decide what you think is appropriate. If the format of the code, how you use libraries, whether you use objects or functional or whatever, you can do everything as copy by value if you like to do it that way. You can manage the stack if you like it that way. You have control. That level of control, that level of freedom means, yes, if you look at somebody else's code, you may think they're a complete moron because they didn't do it the way you did it. But that level of freedom also allows you to do a lot of things you can't do easily in other languages. If you look at it today, there are things that one thing we can do is clean up the code. It's possible to make Perl that looks prettier, or at least get feedback on whether you're doing it right. Perl Best Practices is a neat book. One thing people don't do, how many people here have Perl Best Practices? Right. Have you actually read the introduction, all of it? Because the entire book is on the bottom of page 10. Damien points out, all of this is friendly advice. Consciously develop your programming style and be consistent about it. Take the time to think about the way you program. The rest of the book is fluff. If you just do that much, stop and ask yourself, why am I doing it this way? There are a lot of tools in Perl for doing that. You can use Perl Tidy. One thing to do is plug your stuff through Perl Tidy with a different format and ask, does any of this look any better than the way I do it? Is there any of this that's clearer after I tidy it up? Most of us don't use Perl Tidy because whatever you do it. You're used to looking at it. Try it. I usually look at it and go, feh, and throw it away. But I've picked up a few things that I do now because they looked better after I tidied them. Perl Critic. Again, at a certain point, did anyone see Chromatics talk yesterday? When doing it wrong is doing it right? Perl Critic is one of those doing it right kind of things. Here is, in an ideal world, you do everything this way. We don't live in an ideal world, and frankly, it's wrong sometimes, but at least it gives you feedback, and it's a quick and dirty way to get feedback as you're working. Perl testing, great thing. If you design code that can be tested, it probably is a hell of a lot easier to read. If all you write are these, multi-page functions, it's going to be hard to unit test them. Think about how you test things, go back into testing, and you find if you make things testable, they're probably a lot more readable. The Perl culture for testing. I don't know of any other language where something like CPAN gets smoke tested every single day with a random selection of platforms, a random selection of modules. So the TAP protocol, which I think they were trying to make a standard, and that kind of died. But there's so many test modules, you can design tests that work well with your code, which again helps make your code easier to read and gives you reports on how it works. Anyone use Devel Cover? You know what it does? People know what it does? It tells you whether or not the tests have exercised your code. It doesn't tell you whether the tests mean anything, but it's a good way to tell whether or not you've reached far enough into the code to really check the important parts of it. You can get all these pretty colorful reports. If nothing else, management loves these things. You get all charts and graphs, numbers, colors, love it. But with these kinds of things, you can make Perl that is very testable, that is readable. So no, Perl is not hard to test and maintain. Another thing, people will say Perl 5 is killing Perl 6. This was more of an argument a few years ago when a lot of, Perl 5.8 had been there for a long time and nothing had changed. In fact, if you go to a lot of the cloud servers now, you get Perl 5.8 because no one's bothered to update it. If anybody here uses any of the Amazon or services for their clouds, call them up as a customer and get pissed about the fact that Perl seems to be ancient. Right now on Amazon, 5.8 is the version that isn't supported before the version that isn't supported before the version that isn't supported, and they still have it. But this is a good quote from Larry. Perl 5 had started dying. People didn't see it growing. They didn't see it changing. It was sort of what it was. And there was just really not that much new to work on it. And Perl 6 gave people a chance to think about Perl 5, about the Perl they used in a new way. So Perl 6 really has helped. How many people here have been in any of the talks about new things that are available in Perl 5? Smart matching. Whether you like all of them or not, there's a hell of a lot that's gone on. The core of Perl has been rewritten. It's a lot faster. Regexes have been cleaned up. Destructors, my linked lists, I had to go through all kinds of weird things to break up these nested structures that now I can just let go out of scope and they magically clean themselves up. 5.10 was released in 2007. 10.1 came out with a lot of bug fixes pretty soon after. We're now at the point where these even-numbered releases that are usable are coming out pretty reliably, and the bug fixes are going through. A lot of that came from Perl 6 and having to build a language from scratch and design all the tests from scratch. A lot of that testing got pushed back into 5. If you look at this, I don't know how many core tests are in Perl 5.16, but it's a lot. Have you ever looked at the tests, the T directory in the Perl distro? And the number of...
400,000 counting the bundle libraries.
Okay, well, that's a lot of tests. And again, the level of testing that goes on, a lot of that came back from Perl 6 and got pushed into Perl 5. This test suites, platform coverage, you know, I'm not going to go through all of this, but a lot of Perl 5 got more interesting with 6 out there, and finding ways to backport things, finding ways to apply what the community had thought of as wanted in Perl 6, gave people a new focus. So Perl 6 really has been good for Perl 5. So hopefully if anyone brings these myths up, you can throw this back at them. No, Perl is not dead. It's alive. It's very testable. Because of the testing, it's actually pretty maintainable, and you can make it readable if you want it to. Here's some places to go. A lot of the thing with Buzz, this is my own thing, people are worried about Perl in the news, Perl whatever. More important than Buzz is whether people learn to use Perl. Most universities do not teach Perl. It's just the theoreticians don't like it. One of the best things you can do, aside from having an active Perl Mongers group, if there isn't one, invent it. Just announce that there's a Perl Mongers. It's free to join, so it's not really expensive to start. In Chicago for years, we used to meet in a bar. You walk in, have a few beers and leave. Have a few beers, talk about Perl. Do whatever you want to. If you really feel like you want to help Perl, call the local community college and get paid $100 to teach a room full of people Perl. There's this one weird guy who even wrote a book on learning Perl that you can use, and they actually took it out of a class on teaching Perl. So if you just read the book out loud, you may not sound like Randall, but that book is enough to teach people how to program Perl from scratch. It is a class. And it's the notes from a bunch of people who stand in front of people who don't know Perl and teach them. Try it. Just run a community college class. I'm going to read you this book. I'll get paid $100 for it. If people learn Perl, they start using it, you show them how to do things with it, they're going to get more involved. Oh, this is, which language makes you happiest? And notice that COBOL is pretty low on that list. But there was a great thing in the old Perl journal, Larry Wall did a thing on wherefore art cometh thou. If anyone saw that, it was on the pain scale. If you're into pain, you can use objects, and if you're into easy, you can. And Perl supports both. But do I have any time left? A couple of seconds. A couple of things about Perl 6. This is a good quote. But Perl 6 is not Perl. It'll never be finished, and there's no code written in it. The very fast thing is, if you look, this is Perl 6. For the most part, you'd recognize. You might not understand all of it, but you'll tend to recognize Perl 6. Yeah, it looks like Perl. It's got extensions. It's got various improvements. It's got syntax changes. But if you understand Perl 5, getting into Perl 6 is not that hard. And this is, if we had it done on schedule, it would be crap. There's the whole open source argument that getting something done when it's ready is more important than just shoving it out the door. So when it'll be done, probably never. When will Perl 5 be done? Hopefully never. It won't be done because then it'll be dead. But Perl 6 is growing. It is alive. There's more and more code on it. The Rakudo people, I guess, have got the most advanced version that you can stick on a machine and do something with. There's a lot of it out there. I don't know what this was for. Oh, this was generated with Perl 6, I guess. There is a lot of Perl 6 code out there now. It's gotten to the point where if you want to try Perl 6 out and play with it on the weekends, these are some of the things you can get into. If you wanted to create a quick and dirty SQLite interface, try doing it in Perl 6. What the hell? There's stuff out there that works. Rakudo has gotten pretty good at cycling through, getting new releases, getting bug fixes, getting things done. Parrot pretty much works. I don't know how good a job they're doing of bringing new languages onto it, but it supports a heck of a lot of things. And then the real summary is that, aside from the language, Perl really is, CPAN is part of Perl, the community is part of Perl. They all seem to be alive and well. So the myth that Perl is dead or unusable or anything, no, it isn't. And the best thing we can do is just keep using it. And there's probably no time for questions, and you probably don't have any if you're awake anyway. So, oh, yeah, here's the... And I think, yeah, we're done. Was that useful to anybody? Is anyone awake? No, see, how many people here face questions like these? Oh, we can't use Perl for this project because it's blank. It's too complicated. I can't find Perl programmers. Nobody out there knows Perl. Have you heard that one lately? We can't do it in Perl because I can't hire any Perl programmers. But if you look on CPAN, there's enough new stuff going into it. There's somebody out there that knows Perl, or there wouldn't be that many new things going on in CPAN every day. So, a lot of these myths, I think people accept them because we've heard them so often, and you get sick of, oh yeah, fine, but I still like it. And that's not a good enough answer. The answer is come up with ways to say these things to people that with the information, most of those arguments that people use are just going to fall aside. I think I have to, what time am I over? Okay, so. Okay. Does